Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second annual Retail Summit organized by Center for Retail Transformation at Costello College of Business at George Mason University. I'm Mehmet Shekip Altug. I'm the Director of Center for Retail Transformation. I'm also Associate Professor of Information Systems and Operations Management here at Costello College of Business. We are very excited to be welcoming you today. We have a great lineup of events with 2 keynotes, 4 panels with the industry leaders and experts in their fields. Our panels will be moderated by Mason faculty, Professors Nirab Menon, Saurabh Mishra, and Yannis Bellos. I would like to thank them, all the speakers and the moderators, for their time and support for the event. So as you know, retail industry is going through a major transformation with all the changes in consumer behavior and advances in technology, most recently in AI. And the challenges that the retailers face today can only be overcome with more interdisciplinary collaboration across all fields, which I believe also includes closer collaboration between academia and industry. So Center for Retail Transformation wants to be this platform that brings various stakeholders of the retail ecosystem where all these problems, challenges, and potential solutions can be discussed, as we are going to do today. With that, our center has started various initiatives that are led by Mason faculty that are thought leaders in their fields. And this summit is actually organized around those initiatives. So with that, just enjoy the conference, have a great time, and please make use of the networking opportunities. And finally, I would like to thank our CRT team, Kyle Stone and Nikki Velasera, for their time and help with the promotion of the event and the great ideas and IT system support. And with that, please allow me to introduce our Senior Associate Dean, Cheryl Duruel. Cheryl is also Professor of Information Systems and Operations Management here at Costello College of Business. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you, Mehmet. So welcome to the Costello College of Business at George Mason University and the Center for Retail Transformation. I am Cheryl Duruel, Professor of Operations and Senior Associate Dean, as Mehmet said. And the college is really pleased to host and help host this conference along with the Center for Retail Transformation. This retail transformation, the age of technology and AI, is the critical topic. Technology is certainly one of the main things that we talk about here at the College of Business with our students, with our industry partners, and we're happy to further this conversation with you today. Everything is business here at Costello, and so we are eager to talk about more how we can improve the critical sector of retail with industry. We are pleased to have our great speakers. Garrett, of course, thank you very much. It's great to have you. And our faculty for moderating the conversation. So thank you very much for stepping up and leading these conversations today. And we're looking forward to some really good conversations about all of these different topics and aspects. Supply chain, of course, is a critical area, as we've all learned. And we're happy to talk more about that and have accurate real-time based supply chains with Garrett and Mehmet's help. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And we hope you have a good time and look forward to our conversations.
Thanks, Cheryl. We are very happy to have Gerrit Van Rijzen here with us today as our first keynote speaker. Gerrit is a distinguished scientist at Amazon in the Supply Chain Optimization Technologies Group. Before joining Amazon, he was a distinguished scientist and head of Marketplace Lab at Lyft, working on pricing and market design. Prior to Lyft, Gerrit was head of Marketplace Optimization and Advanced Development at Uber. Gerrit was also a professor of decision risk and operations at Columbia University Graduate School of Business, where I had the privilege to work with him as a doctoral student. Subsequently, he was the professor of operations technology and information management at Cornell Tech. Gerrit received his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Columbia University. He also a master's degree in electrical engineering and computer science and a PhD in operations research from MIT. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. We will go through them and ask to Gerrit as much as we can given the time that we have. So with that, I will hand it over to Garrett Van Mason as our first keynote. Thanks, Garrett.
All right, thanks, Mehmet, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to talk a little bit about. So I work, as Mehmet said, I work in Amazon. I am in the supply chain optimization technology group. We're the group that really develops the technology that runs the retail supply chain within Amazon. And I know this is a retail group, but what I want to talk about is something related to one of the biggest pieces of our retail business, which is the third-party marketplace business, which is known as like, and an element of that is fulfillment by Amazon. So that's what FBA stands for. And I'll tell you what that is in a second, but I think most of you have probably heard about it. But yeah, and in some ways, this is just a glimpse of like what happens inside the walls of Amazon in terms of how we manage capacity. And managing capacity, especially for the third-party sellers on the platform, is pretty tricky because they're autonomous and they have a lot of freedom to kind of operate in the way they want in terms of like stocking things and selling it. But we have to manage a physical network that supports those businesses. And this has always created some tension. And so what I'm going to talk about today is a pretty novel product that we came up with to do market-based capacity management. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But it's been a real innovation and a real unlock in the FBA business. So I'll kind of give you a little history of the FBA business. Here, let me just, hold on. Oh yeah, so with the team of people involved, here's the snapshot. Yeah, it's a big group of people that were involved in this project. So I'm just kind of speaking on behalf of the group. But I'll talk a little bit about what FBA is, for those of you who are maybe not so familiar with it, why it's kind of a tricky thing for us internally at Amazon to kind of manage the FBA business, and what the main kind of challenges are in terms of providing capacity to support these sellers on our fulfillment network. And then I'll talk about sort of the actual product that we developed, this market-based mechanism. And there's a few, it's really an auction mechanism. So for people who are kind of curious, there are some, I'll talk a little bit about the properties of it and then kind of show you snapshots of what the live product looks like and the kind of external reaction that we got from it. And this is a product that sellers interact with. So if you are an FBA seller, this is a product that you would actually use to support your retail business on Amazon. So if any of you out there are Amazon sellers or sell on Amazon, you've probably seen this, and maybe this will be helpful for you in understanding how it works. Oh, and as Mehmet said, if anybody has questions, please post them in the chat. I'm happy to answer questions, and I think it may help if there's common confusion about certain things that I'm describing or additional details you want. So just post it in the chat, and Mehmet will relay it to me. So what is FBA? So FBA stands for Fulfillment by Amazon. And basically in 2006, Amazon made the decision to open up its retail platform to third-party sellers. So prior to 2006, pretty much the way Amazon operated was like any other e-commerce retailer. We had like, we worked with vendors, we decided what products we wanted to carry, we bought those products from vendors, we brought them into our network, we posted them, we sold them, et cetera, et cetera. And then around 2006, we had the idea to sort of basically open up that network to third-party sellers. And this is not unlike, this change was not unlike kind of what Amazon did with AWS. And I don't know if any of you have read the 2023 shareholder letter that our CEO, Andy Jassy, just released, but he talks about this in quite a bit of detail in that letter about this idea of the company building out what he calls like primitives or like, building block components. And so like what AWS, the lesson we kind of learned from AWS is we built this amazing infrastructure to host our own e-commerce business. And it turned out we built a lot of very useful components to do that, to kind of support our own internal business. And the whole success story of AWS was like taking those components and externalizing them. So other companies could use them. And, and like And it was fabulously successful with AWS. And this is kind of a similar effort on the retail side, which is like, yeah, we run a retail business, but we've been running that retail business for decades. We've gotten very good at how we run it. We've got very sophisticated physical infrastructure to do e-commerce fulfillment, like fulfillment centers, our own local delivery network, pretty much our own airline. So the idea of this was to kind of externalize that fulfillment network to third-party sellers. And what that means is, like, you know, you as a brand, or if you have and these sellers are all over the place. I mean, some of them are just mom and pop operations that, you know, make a product in their garage and, you know, sell it. Others are basically, you know, brands that are owned by private equity companies that specialize in just investing in Amazon sellers and building portfolios of those sellers. So it's a huge ecosystem at this point of different types of sellers that sell on Amazon's platform. But essentially what it does is it provides sort of like supply chain as a service. So as a seller, you can just sign up on Amazon and opt into this FBA, and you know, you basically just send the products to us, we store them, we distribute them in our network, we fulfill them, we handle returns, et cetera. And it just becomes, you know, sort of a very frictionless, easy way to kind of like offload all of your supply chain and e-commerce fulfillment stuff to Amazon and take advantage of the network we built and the technology we built. And this is just kind of a simple guide, it's a snapshot from the website, but just, you know, you can literally just set up an account to become an FBA seller, create product listings, upload those listings to our website. Then those listings show up, you know, in the Amazon store. And then you just do some simple steps to prepare the product, and then you send it to us, and then we take care of it from there. Like, we receive the product, put it in the network, and do all the fulfillment. And so, and then, you know, there are fees obviously for all these different services. So we charge a fee for like fulfillment, a fee for storage. But most sellers find that it's quite, you know, I mean, you get advantage of like not having to do all this stuff yourself, and plus you get, you know, your presence in the Amazon store and kind of Amazon's like next day delivery, access to Prime members and stuff like that. Now, so we launched that in 2006. When we originally launched it, it was pretty small part of the business, but it has several desirable features, which at this point have kind of like made it more important to Amazon than almost our own retail business. So one is that it generates, at this point in time, it generates more gross merchandise sales, so what kind of revenue, basically. The revenue we generate from third-party sellers is larger than the revenue we generate on in our own retail business. And it, in terms of like contribution profit, it also has like, we have sort of higher margins on this business as well internally at Amazon. And this is partly due to the mix of products. Like our retail business at this point tends to be more sort of like everyday essential stuff, but it's a more profitable business for us than the traditional retail business. And we also sell more units on FBA than we do on the retail business. And the most important thing from kind of a growth standpoint is the year-on-year growth of this business is quite a bit higher than on the retail business. And one of the reasons, and that's why actually at this point in time it's gotten so big, because like it started out very small. There's a few percentage of kind of like a few percentage, you know, 5% of the capacity in the network was the third-party marketplace business. At this point, it's like well over half the capacity, something like 60% or more of the units sold in the capacity is FBA. And it also does tend to consume more capacity, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One again is the mix of products. Like third-party sellers tend to have more kind of niche products, things that have sort of, you know, higher, lower inventory turns, and so they tend to occupy more space in the network. And also because like we don't control it as directly. So like they send us stuff, we have to store it in the network, so we don't have as much control over their use of capacity in the network. And so that And the thing with capacity at Amazon is, why is it a challenging thing? One is to just, it's important to understand like that our retail network is enormously technically sophisticated. So Memo was talking about like AI and stuff like that. I mean, there's tons of technology embedded in the fulfillment network at Amazon. And it's basically, Amazon's a super vertically integrated company. So we have a lot of technology we develop. Like these things in the upper right-hand corner, you see these carousels, those yellow pods that have like different bins in them, and the little orange things underneath it. Like those are Kiva robots. And Kiva is a company that you see the robots on the left, actually. They're these little platforms that run around and they pick up these pods and they carry them around. So this is how we fulfill things. Like, and it's pretty much it's basically like this is like a giant physical random access memory is the way to think of this. Like we have a whole floor that's full of these pods, and these pods have these little bins, and we stuff products into these pods, but they're pretty much stuffed in random order. But we keep track, obviously, of which pod we put the product in, which bin in the pod we put the product in. And then when somebody orders something, when we get an order, like we just address it, like we address that pod, and then the robot goes over, picks up the pod, brings it over to a picking station, and then somebody reaches in to the bin inside that pod, retrieves the product and puts it in a box, and then the robot takes the pod back. And so it's like, so these fulfillment centers are not just like warehouses with, like a tin roof and a bunch of like metal racks in it. They're filled with this highly automated, highly capital intensive robotics equipment, these sophisticated kind of picking stations and things like that. And that's what allows us to be able to like pick these things really quickly, ship it, have high throughput, et cetera, et cetera. But it means that the physical storage capacity is like pretty high capital expenditure, pretty high CapEx to build these fulfillment centers. Plus, we also are trying to locate these things close to major metro areas. So we want them to be close to points of demand so that we can fulfill the same day or even sub same day. So the point is, like, sellers in FBA get the advantage of having their stuff in this very high tech network that has very high quality, fast delivery. But at the same time, providing that high quality, fast delivery is expensive. So we have to be very efficient in how we utilize that capacity. And it's challenging as I mentioned, it's challenging to manage this with FBA sellers. So our internal terminology for FBA sellers is selling partners, SPs. But the thing is, like, they, because they run their own businesses on our platform, they have a lot of decision-making authority. So they decide what products to carry. They decide what prices to charge, which affect, obviously, how fast the products sell. They make all the kind of ordering, reordering, replenishment decisions. So they're the ones that just monitor the inventory. They decide whether they're going to ship us more or not ship us more. And that means that so they're basically, that's why I say it's like a cloud. It's like a supply chain in the cloud kind of thing. They send us the stuff. They control what they stock, how they price it, when they send it to us. We distribute it, but then we're just kind of on the receiving end, and we have to kind of like receive it and stuff like that, and we have to store it in our network, and we just don't have the control that we had when we're dealing with like a vendor. Because when we deal with a vendor, like, we decide how much we're going to order. We decide when we're going to order it, and that's really not the case with this. And again, like, this was not a big deal when FBA first got started because it was relatively small. So, like, FBA sellers, in the old days sent us, twice as much stuff as we were expecting. Yeah, okay, it was like, went from 5% capacity to 10% capacity. We could absorb that kind of just by cutting a little bit back on our own retail business. But when FBA is like 60% of the space that's occupied, these 50% of the inventory that we have, or more than that, is FBA, and that fluctuates, it has enormous effects on the network. And this was really exacerbated during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, when like the whole world shut down, everybody was trying to order stuff from Amazon. It created this enormous demand shock, and FBA was quite big at that time, and that created a lot of a lot of difficulty for us. So fortunately, like right before the pandemic hit, we launched kind of our initial attempt to try to manage the capacity of these sellers, and it was a system called the SMS, the Storage Management System. And it's pretty elementary, but it really helped a lot. But it's basically what I refer to as like a predict and allocate system. So essentially, what we were doing is, we have a lot of data, because the third-party sellers are selling on our platform. We see every sale, we see how much inventory we have, and things like that. So we can make pretty good predictions about forecasts, essentially, of like what they're going to sell, kind of in, let's say, the near-term horizon. And so what we would do is we would make predictions of, like, on a seller basis. So for each seller, looking at their whole portfolio of products, we'd make a prediction of how much they would sell, maybe how much they would bring into the network, what level of inventory they would be holding. And we would predict sort of the marketplace value of those sales. And as a, just to anchor it, like roughly what we're talking about there is sort of like the total sales that they generate on their portfolio of products. So, so in Amazon, when we run a third-party marketplace like this, like we're obviously concerned with the sellers and we want them to succeed, but we also have our Amazon customers, the end customers that are buying these products, and we want to allocate the space to things that those customers value as well. So we care about the seller profits, but we also care about having selection and products that are relevant for our end consumers. And a good proxy for that is just like, what do they want to buy and how much are they spending on the platform? And so roughly you can think of this marketplace value as being the total revenue we generate from that seller. So we would do these predictions, and then we would kind of try to do a counterfactual prediction of, like, if we gave them less capacity, how much would it hurt sales? And so we had this marketplace value as a function of the capacity we allocated to them. So this E is like the capacity that we would allocate to them. And we essentially solved a simple kind of like resource allocation problem. We'd say, like, for sellers, if we thought we were going to be constrained in how much capacity we could provide these sellers, we'd allocate each seller a chunk of capacity, such that the sum of those allocations was less than our available capacity. And the sum of the gross merchandise sales that we would generate from the allocations would be maximized. Now, this also came along with this performance index that we generated for sellers. So we have something we call the Inventory Performance Index, the IPI, which essentially ranks sellers in terms of how efficient they are in terms of inventory. And essentially it's effectively a sales per unit of capacity metric. So sellers that have, like, high turning, do a good job managing inventory, turn over their inventory quickly, generate a lot of sales per unit of capacity, those sellers would get a high IPI. And if they got above a certain threshold, we would not constrain them. So the way this worked is, high sellers that are already quite efficient in their use of capacity got free reign to kind of like use as much as they wanted to. Sellers that were below a certain critical threshold were rationed according to this, like, SMS system. So that's the thing that we had in place, like, shortly before the pandemic, and it really saved us when we went into the pandemic, because it allowed us to be able to, allocate the capacity efficiently so that, we didn't exceed capacity constraints in the network, and we still preserved, like, as much of the sales to end consumers as we could possibly generate. The trouble is that system has, it's got a lot of advantages, but also has some major disadvantages. And one of the major disadvantages is that, and this is something, like, I've kind of found in my career, is like, a lot of times you talk to, like, engineering quant type people, and they'll be like, oh, well, we have all this data, we should just be able to predict our way out of the problem. Like, we throw it at some big high dimensional machine learning model, and we'll be able to predict exactly what, like, how much capacity we should be giving every seller. And that's kind of what this system is doing. But the trouble with that is it doesn't account for the the private information problem, which is that sellers have a lot of information that, you know, even with all the data that we have, they know things that we don't know. And the classic use case that where we were running into problems were sellers that were like, you know, they had a new product, for example, and they thought it was going to be a super successful new product, and they were just bringing it to market. And then we would say, oh, well, based on your past sales, we think you only need X amount of capacity. And they would be like, no, I've got this great new product. I need twice that. And we had no way that they could really get out from under the capacity constraint that we put on them. And the only way they could get out from under it would be to call us up and complain and argue about it. And so we used to have thousands of these exception requests. So we'd impose these constraints, and this is especially true during like peak period. And then these sellers who had these big growth opportunities were kind of like really caught in a bind. And the only way they could get out would be to kind of like try to call and complain and try to essentially bargain for like more capacity. And it wasn't a good process. It wasn't a good experience for sellers. And the other thing is that like it was fundamentally limiting the ability of these sellers to grow. And even though it wasn't, I can share some rough numbers in a second, but it's not necessarily like a large number of sellers, but these are the sellers that have big growth opportunities. And so if you constrain those sellers, you're really constraining the growth of the business. You're constraining their growth, and you're constraining the growth of FBA. All right. So within the yeah, and so just to give you an example of it, like, you know, a few years ago, when Squid Games was all the rage, I think it's like the Halloween before last, or maybe the one before that, like, you know, everybody wanted a Squid Games costume. And this is an example of one of these things where it's like, you know, people who are in the costume industry and had their pulse on the, you know, what was the trends were, so like, we would have a very hard time. It's a brand new thing. Squid Games came out, the series. It was a big hit. Everybody wanted a Squid Games, but we have no idea like which sellers have the Squid Game costumes, which ones are going to be a big hit, et cetera, et cetera. And so, and for us to kind of provide that, kind of breakthrough product and that everybody wants, like, we have to identify those sellers. We have to give them the right capacity. We have to unlock them to be able to sell it. And this is a real problem with one of these kind of backward-looking kind of predict and allocate systems. It's very hard to predict a new product like this that's going to be highly successful. And so, and the thing is, like, what we really want to, so what I want to describe to you in a second is like kind of like, or what I want to describe to you in this page is the kind of allocation we'd like to be able to generate. And what I'm showing you is just a very simple example with, I imagine that I have these 5 products, and that there is, all right, there's 3 different characteristics for each product. It's what the actual sales will be. So this is like, imagine you had a crystal ball and I could tell you in the future, here's what the sales are going to be for this. And imagine like we're thinking about the next quarter. So for the next quarter, what do we think the actual sales will be? Or what will the actual sales be? And then we have our estimate, like our own internal Amazon forecast of sales. So if you look at the column, the table on the left. So the first column is what will actually sell. The second column is our estimate of what will sell. And then the third column is the profit that sellers make on the actual sales. And the thing that we really would love to, or ideally would like to achieve, would be to allocate the space based on the actual sales. So imagine a situation where I can only stock 3 of these products. So I only have capacity to stock 3 of these. And then I ask myself, which 3 would I want to stock? Right. Well, if I want to stock based on actual sales, that ranking on the far right, the sales ranking, would be what I'd want. So, and let me just say, first of all, for the products that kind of representing, I have like toilet and batteries, toilet paper and batteries. Those are kind of representative of like basic everyday essentials. So those are products that like we sell a lot of. They have a lot of like we generate a lot of sales on those things, but they're not super high profit products because they're kind of like low margin, but like high revenue products. I'm also showing you two different costumes, like the Squid Game costume and the Snow White costume. So those are representative. Like Snow White is like the traditional costume that we think would typically sell well in Halloween. Squid Games is this novel new costume where we would tend to like our backward-looking models would tend to underestimate how much it sells. So what I'm showing in this example is like we think Snow White's going to sell because it's always sold well in the past, but this year Squid Games came out. We have this new Squid Game costume, so we sort of like overestimate what we're going to sell in terms of Snow White and underestimate what we're going to sell in terms of the Squid Games. And then the last product is a handbag, and what I just want to show there is something that does not have a lot of sales but has a lot of profit. So what we're trying to achieve is like something where we would allocate the capacity to the products whose actual sales would be the highest. And if we looked at the actual sales column, it would be like the toilet paper, the batteries, and the Squid Game costume. However, if we do this prediction thing, we would predict, like toilet paper and batteries are going to sell a lot, but we would predict the Snow White costume, and we would possibly ration the Squid Game costume out of the market. Now, people in the company, it was interesting, like I joined about 3.5 years ago, and this thing was kind of just getting going. There were a lot of people in the company thought, like, we should have an auction for this capacity. Like, that's the thing that would really solve this problem, because we could let sellers who really had these big opportunities bid for capacity, and then we'd get it and we'd solve the problem. The trouble with like a straightforward auction is you would get the allocation that you get in the middle there, which is when you auction, if you do a straight monetary auction, you get an allocation that says like the sellers that earn the most per unit of capacity are the ones who profit the most per unit of capacity, are the ones that are going to win the auction, because they're the ones that are going to be able to bid the highest. And in this case, like we would get the Squid Game costume, which is what we wanted, but we would lose out on these basic products. So one of the problems with a profit ranking is that it doesn't align with kind of necessarily what our end consumers want to buy. And this is actually a problem that people ran into in the early days of internet auctions, which is, when they first did like display advertising or search ranking, sort of either, search or display advertising on the internet, is that, if you allocate those kind of, let's say, display ads to the highest bidders, like even if people are typing in something like, lawn furniture, like you might get accident attorneys advertising because because they make so much money, and then if somebody clicks on the ad, they'll get some lawsuit and make a bunch of money and stuff like that. So it's like you get all this irrelevant stuff that just has very high profit for the person that's advertising, but isn't that relevant to the person that's searching. And it's a little bit of the same phenomenon here. If we just allocated capacity to the products that had the most, the products that generated the most profit for the sellers, we wouldn't necessarily be providing products that are desired by our end consumers. And basically a lot of the low margin, high volume kind of products would get rationed out of the market. So kind of like what we're trying to do, we do want something like an auction, but something that produces that ranking on the right that's more like a sales ranking rather than a profit ranking. So that's kind of like the alignment challenge. It's like, so in some ways, like our predict and rank algorithm produces the first column, a pure profit auction would produce the second column, and what we really want is the third column, which is the kind of the sales ranking. Okay, so how do we do that? And the way we did it is to develop an auction, but it's kind of a unique auction, and we actually filed a patent on this, and so it's something that it's not that complicated, but it's a little bit novel. And we launched it as this product called Capacity Limit Manager, and I'll show you kind of the UI and stuff like that. But let me first explain the basic idea. So first of all, like we had some sort of modest design requirements, which is one is like, as I mentioned, like the notion of efficiency that we want to achieve in this auction is kind of the marketplace value per cube, or roughly like the sales per unit of capacity, not the seller profit per unit of capacity. So kind of the allocation we're trying to come up with is more like that last column in the example I was showing, which is kind of a sales per unit of capacity allocation. The other requirement is that the purpose of running this auction is not for Amazon to make money. So we're not running an auction because we want to generate more money from sellers, because we already charge them, fees and revenue share and things like that. And it was interesting within the company when we were doing this. There was a lot of the reluctance among the senior leadership on this idea was like, we don't want to be perceived as like, like sellers are our customers too. And we care about them, staying with Amazon, growing their business on Amazon. We're not trying to squeeze them for extra profit. And the worry was that we would get in this situation where we have to constrain them. We don't have the capacity. And we're in a situation where we would constrain them, and then we'd say, oh, by the way to get out of this constraint is to pay us more money. That was like and people were very reluctant to try to do anything like that, because of the negative backlash from sellers. And we're not trying to generate more money for us. We're not trying to generate more revenue for Amazon. We're trying to get this allocation of like, that things that customers want to buy, and trying to maximize that kind of the sales to our end customers. But at the same time, like, the mechanism has to be credible. So we can't just ask sellers, oh, do you have a big opportunity for this space? And they could just say, oh yeah, I've got a great opportunity. And then we give them a bunch of space and they don't use it, which would be like, huge opportunity cost to us. So the mechanism still had to be credible. Like they had to make credible commitments. And then it also had to be simple. So one of the principles at Amazon, pretty much one of our leadership principles, is invent and simplify. So there's always a huge premium on trying to simplify things for sellers. And simplification here is it's like an easy to understand mechanism, and it's kind of simple to come up with a strategy on how to request extra space. All right, so here's the key idea behind it, is that we create this product where sellers are allowed to request a limit increase. So the way this works is we still do this predict and allocate thing. So we do still predict and allocate space to sellers based on our internal forecasts, but we reserve a little chunk of space for this auction. And then what we say to sellers is, if you're not happy with your space, or you think you need more of it, submit a request in this auction mechanism.
We have one question from the audience. Sure. Why use FBA for high volume everyday products like batteries? Doesn't Amazon sell those directly?
Yeah, we do. That's a good question. Yeah, that was just kind of an extreme example. Within, we do. First of all, we don't put any restrictions really on third-party sellers, so they can sell whatever they want. It's more to illustrate that even within the FBA business, there are sellers that have low margin, high volume products, and others that have high margin, low volume products. So, it's more just to anchor the idea that, like, because even within the FBA selection, here's the thing: it's like if you just do a pure monetary auction, like sellers that just generate a lot of profits are the ones that are going to have the power to bid in that auction. And then all these sellers that have, like, they may sell a lot, but they don't have much margin on it, are going to get squeezed out of the market. Now, maybe it's not exactly batteries and toilet paper, but it's like other sort of products that might be. And we do have a lot of sellers that sell, like soaps and other apparel, and I mean, there's all sorts of things that third-party sellers sell. So the generic problem is still there. Yeah. okay, so here's the way the mechanism works. So the sellers request an increase, and they actually effectively they commit to generate some sales on that increase. So let's say, I'm in a situation, I get 1,000 cubic feet of capacity. I think I need another 500 cubic feet because I've got some new product I want to launch. I effectively am kind of committing to how much sales I say I need 500 more cubic feet, and I'm going to commit to this amount of sales on that cubic feet. It's not quite that, but it's effectively kind of turns out to that. And then we grant the requests based on these commitments. So like if the sellers who commit to a lot of sales on the increased space, kind of get ranked first, and then we kind of allocate based on that ranking. But the exact mechanism is a little bit more complicated, and it's based on this idea of like some auction theory ideas about bidding for securities. But the way it works, the exact detail of how it works is as follows: is that they submit the request for the space, and they offer a price per unit of space, and cubic feet is what we use as the unit of space. So they might say, I want 500 more cubic feet, and I'm going to offer you like $6 per cubic feet. So if they win that, then they basically get if they win the 500 extra cubic feet, they can earn performance credits on that extra space. And the way this works is we attribute sales to that extra space. And this happens initially on a quarterly basis. It's now on a monthly basis. But over this performance period, they generate some sales on that extra space. And for every unit of sales they generate on that extra space, we give them a credit of some percentage, which is basically 15% right now. So let's say you generated $10,000 worth of sales, then you would get a $1,500 credit on that space. And that credit could go to offsetting the fee that you agreed to. The idea and the way we frame this is as follows: that if you have a big opportunity and you think you're going to generate a lot of sales, then you can anticipate earning a lot of these credits on those sales. And if you're going to earn those credits, then you can afford to put up a pretty big fee because the credits will offset the fee. So and actually it turns out that's more or less equivalent. It's more or less equivalent to like promising to generate a certain amount of GMS, and then if you under deliver on the GMS, we charge you a penalty for under delivery. But it's a kind of a different framing of it. Yeah, so the exact mechanism is this credit mechanism. And then we run these auctions periodically, like leading up to these allocation periods. And the other thing is that when we auction off this space, it's a kind of what's called a uniform price auction. So what that means is like you might bid $6 per cubic feet for your request. But if we clear the market at like $4 per cubic feet, then you only are going to be on the hook for $4 per cubic foot. So you'll still earn your credits, but you only, as long as your credits exceed $4 per cubic feet, you don't owe anything. And so the whole idea of this is sort of like sellers that really do have a lot of confidence in the sales they're going to generate with the space can anticipate these credits. They can afford to bid a lot for the space. We'll give it to them. And then, the kind of happy path is that they generate the credits. The credits are more than enough to pay the fee, and they've gotten the space for free. And sort of the enforcement mechanism is that if they ask for a lot of space and they don't generate a lot of sales on it, then they're not going to earn many credits, and then they're going to owe the fee. So there's kind of it's kind of got financial teeth in it, in a sense that but for sellers that have a lot of confidence in their ability to generate sales, they can afford to bid fairly aggressively in this mechanism. Yeah, man,
What's the timeline? How frequently you do this, and how far in advance you do this?
Well, when we first launched this, which was when we first launched it a couple of years ago, we were doing this on a quarterly basis. So they would bid for an allocation for the quarter, and then so every quarter you would get one of these SMS allocations, and then you would be able to top it up and ask for an extra limit increase through this mechanism, and then that you'd get that limit for the entire quarter, and then there'd be another auction for the next quarter. And so like now we moved to a month-to-month kind of mechanism, so that now they have like a 3-month horizon. So it's still a quarter, but and then they can bid for every one of those months, and it's a kind of a rolling 3-month horizon that they allocate over. This is a numerical example, but maybe I won't go through this just because it's like a lot of detail. But again, like the ideal for this is that like sellers who have large potential can anticipate these credits, will bid aggressively for this. They succeed and they sell a lot with the allocation we give them. They earn a bunch of credits, and the credits are more than enough to offset the fee. And just our experience with this so far is since launching it, and this varies a little bit, but order of magnitude, like more than like 90% of sellers end up not paying anything for this capacity. So by and large, it's sort of achieving the objective of like sellers. The sellers who are winning these auctions are ones that do have, large sales that they generate on these increases, that generate large credits that enable them to just like effectively get the capacity for free. Yeah, and it turns out like this auction, it turns out that you can show this is implementing what's called a scoring auction. And what this means is that like we're effectively ranking sellers on sort of a combination of the profit. If you think of like what a seller is willing to pay for this space, or the maximum amount they're willing to bid for this space, is really the profit, which is what they would get in an ordinary kind of a monetary auction where we just give it to the highest bidder. But this augments that with, the alpha, which is the percentage of credit that we give them times the sales they can expect. So what this means is that sellers that can generate a lot of sales but don't have a lot of profit have this extra power to bid in the auction because they can anticipate generating a lot of credits. So what this, and if that alpha was really, really large, you could let that thing get really, really large. It would be like only sellers with high sales could afford to bid because the profit wouldn't really count for much. The credits would be super valuable. And by the way, the credits, they can't keep the credits if they exceed the fee. So it's not like you can make money on the credits, but the credits can offset a very high fee. So what this does is it gives sellers that have like possibly low profit, but very high sales, added power, added purchasing power in the auction. Okay. Yeah, and we did some simulation testing. The only thing I want to say about this is, we did show that we were able to generate like higher profits, both for sellers and for Amazon as a whole. And consumers had higher sales. And there's some, because we took away a little capacity from all sellers, there was some loss among a few sellers, modest losses among a few sellers, but the sellers that win in the auction and they get this extra space did substantially better. And so, and we've seen that empirically as well in launching that it's really, the sellers that win these allocations are quite a bit more efficient with the space than one way we measure this is in terms of the, they're much more efficient with the space than the ones that we allocate on a predictive basis. And just to show you what it looks like live. So if you're an FBA seller, this is what you get. There's something called Seller Central, which is like their website portal. You can go into this thing called Capacity Monitor, and you get a screen that looks like this. So this is a 3-month capacity outlook. You can see in this one, there is the kind of the base allocation, which is the one that we give you kind of for free. And then the incremental capacity that you get through the capacity manager. So this is a seller that has like 332 cubic feet of base capacity, and they bid and won an extra 220 cubic feet. And yeah, and this is this is the 220 feet. So this is, you can see that where did this 220 cubic feet come from? The seller made two different bids on February 1st and 2nd, one for 120 cubic feet, one for 100 cubic feet. They won both of those bids. The reservation fee that they paid was 122. That's what it cleared at. And so, you know, so they won those allocations and they have that locked in. And then this just means as long as their credits exceed, as long as they generate more credits, or the credits that they generate exceed $1.22 per cubic feet, they would end up not owing anything for these allocations. And then this is how they enter a bid. Basically, they select the period they want to bid for. They select how much volume they want, their kind of the reservation fee, the bid that they're willing to pay, and then we give them a little tool to kind of calculate. And this tool really allows them to calculate their anticipated credits. So kind of like roughly the guidance we give them is like, figure out what your anticipated credits are and then bid what those credits are worth. And then you won't end up having to owe anything if you win. Yeah, so and actually one of the big things we were worried about is sellers were really going to get turned off by the auction idea, but it was surprisingly well received in the sense that I think sellers got the idea. Oh yeah, because I mean, the great thing about FBA sellers is they're a very entrepreneurial bunch. And so this was like, oh yeah, it's like, you know, we can take a gamble, and, you know, if we've got a big opportunity, we can put our money where our mouth is and get extra capacity. And this is fair because if we do well, we'll get the credits and we won't owe anything. So it's like, it really, I think, appealed to their entrepreneurial instincts. And so one of the big fears that, again, like the senior leadership had was like, we did an auction, it would be perceived badly. It was actually quite the opposite. It's been quite well received. There was a bunch of trade press when we launched this around, you know, Amazon's turning FBA into an auction, and it was like kind of like some of it was skeptical, but other parts of it were positive. But you know, it's been now a couple of years since we've launched this, so this was back in January 2023 was when we announced it. So not quite 2 years, but yeah, but it was overall pretty well received in the press, and we even got a call out in the Q1 a year ago in the earnings release for Q1 of 2023. It was mentioned in the earnings report that we launched that system. Yeah, and this year we're you know, the big crunch time for us is like the peak kind of Christmas selling season. That's starting to ramp up pretty soon, actually, believe it or not, like towards the end of the summer. Like that's when the people will start sending us stuff and kind of ramping up towards the holiday season. And at this point, like every seller has access to this, and we plan to go quite a bit bigger with this for the upcoming season. So it's been, you know, all in all, quite a successful product. I think something that's quite innovative.
Thank you so much, Garrett. We have one question from the audience, another one.
Sure.
Sellers also allow for delayed capacity instead of having immediate capacity to ship within a couple of days.
Wait, say it again? I'm sorry, I didn't catch you.
Can sellers also allow for delayed capacity instead of having immediate capacity to ship within a couple of days?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is like, yeah, well, that's why we give them this 3-month horizon. So like, it's sort of like, you know, so if you're an overseas, you know, if you have overseas manufacturing, let's say you manufacture in Asia and it takes you, you know, 6 weeks to get the product in, then you need to know like, well, you know, 6 to 12 weeks in advance, like what, you know, you need the capacity. You need to know now if you're going to send a shipment that you're going to have the capacity when it arrives. So that's why we give this like 3-month planning horizon. So then you would, you know, you might not bid for the upcoming month, you bid for month 2 or 3 to kind of secure the capacity so that when you order today, you have the capacity when it arrives.
Okay.
Is that yeah, but it's like, I mean, once it's in our network, then we fulfill it. I mean, there's no issue around capacity once it's in the network. So it's really just the limits that we impose that are just on like how much you store in the network. So they're more like, so the concern is more that you have the capacity, so when you create a shipment, like you have capacity available to put that shipment in when it arrives.
Great. Another question is, let me see, coming from the audience. Why only use the auction for requesting additional storage space? Why allocate
yeah, good question. That's a good question. So like, yeah, on one level you can say like, why don't we just turn everything into auction? But I think the reality is, yeah, it's always a trade-off. I think any of these, the thing is, I mean, we tried to make this as simple as possible, but I think you saw through the screens and sort of like, it still requires some effort to think through like how much you want to bid and how to formulate your bid and blah 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 and manage these bids from week to week. And if you're a seller that has a relatively steady business and you don't have any particularly unique opportunity, especially if you're already a pretty efficient seller, you tend to get an adequate allocation. And so it's sort of like if there's nothing exceptional, the automatic allocation that we compute is actually fine for most sellers. So like we don't want to make every seller jump through the hoop of having to participate in an auction and blah 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 if they just have a relatively steady business and we can just predict and give them the right allocation to begin with. So it's a kind of a trade-off of like we want to make it as simple as possible for sellers that don't need anything exceptional, but also give them this capability to go beyond the kind of base allocation if they have special circumstances. So it's really just to kind of try to simplify the experience for sellers that don't need to do this.
Thank you so much, Garrett. We really appreciate this. This was a great presentation.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And with that, I'll ask the audience to move on to our other panels that will start at 1 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah.